Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. December 5, 1941. Today, the first group of Roma arrived in the ghetto. They arrived in locked wagons. Almost all the men were handcuffed. The women carried their children on their shoulders, along with some laundry and bedding. Almost all the women were dressed in light clothes. The children were without shoes. Let me remind you, it was December, not August. The picture is impossible for me to describe. I cannot decide whether what I see is actual reality or merely a nightmare. Never before have I witnessed such a terrible scene. This quote is taken from the diary of Shlomo Frank, a Jewish deportee in the Lodz ghetto, originally written in Yiddish. Shlomo Frank was witness that day to the arrival of approximately 5,000 Roma from Austria who had been deported by Nazi Germany to the Lodz ghetto, which at the time already contained over 200,000 Jews. Within the so-called Jewish ghetto, the Nazi created a separate camp for Sinti and Roma, referred to by the Nazis as the Gypsy camp. Conditions among the Roma deportees were particularly atrocious, and soon an epidemic of typhus broke out. The death rate was rapid and appalling. Jewish doctors were allowed to assist the sick Roma, knowing that they pay with their lives for that. Soon afterwards, the Nazis began transporting the remaining Roma to their death by gas in Chelmno. In the perpetual hell created by the Nazis and their collaborators throughout occupied Europe, our two people, the Jews and the Roma and Sinti, shared only the murderous racist hatred of their captors, who allowed them then to share nothing else. They were deliberately and manipulatively kept apart, each people destined to its own horrible fate. Sinti and Roma and Jews, we were transported in similar cattle cars. We were murdered in the same gas chambers here at Birkenau and elsewhere. Our bodies were burned in the same crematoria, and our ashes were dispersed in the same fields. Thus, we, Jews, Sinti and Roma, became eternal partners in the moral battle against evil and in the battle for the remembrance of the innocent victims and their legacy. My participation here today as chairman of Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, can be seen as a milestone on that moral partnership. At this pivotal, a symbolic commemoration, at this horrible but meaningful place, I wish to express, on behalf of the Jewish people, our profound recognition of the catastrophic genocide inflicted upon the Roma and Sinti simultaneously with the Holocaust, and to identify with your eternal grief. We heard here that it took to many countries, to many nations, probably all of them, took them decades to recognize the genocide of the Sinti and Roma. Not to us, not to the Jewish people, because we saw you here. Let me remind you that in the famous Adolf Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in 1961, Article 11 in the indictment was the accusation against Adolf Eichmann of participation in the genocide of what then was called, referred to as the Gypsies, and the Israeli court convicted Adolf Eichmann of that crime, and that was part of the historic verdict. Currently, both our people are experiencing frightening global phenomena of denial and distortion of the terrible crimes committed against us in the past. Such denial and distortion have already led to hatred, conflict, and violence, and if unchecked, will continue to poison our societies and threaten their existence. My own country has recently discovered, to our utter shock, that destructive forces motivated by genocidal hatred are capable of denying even documented atrocities that were committed only a few months ago. So we do not naively assume that fighting prejudice and ignorance is easy or is simple. We know it's difficult, but we are determined to succeed. As we continue to face hatred, nations committed to morality, justice, and truth must join hands and hearts against racism, against anti-Semitism, against anti-Gypsyism. This requires deep commitment, courage, constant effort, professional skill, and also adequate resources. With this in mind, Yad Vashem has taken and will continue to take a central role within the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, in the development and implementation of what is known as the recommendations for teaching and learning about the persecution and genocide of the Roma during the Nazi era. This is one of our ways of helping to share your story, our Roma and Sinti colleagues, your memory with the entire world. I conclude with the biblical exhortation in Hebrew, which encapsulates our shared commitment to the eternal remembrance of what was done here to our peoples 8 decades ago. Zachor velo tishkach. Remember and do not forget.